Hi, you're listening to Baachu Talk FM, a podcast for facilities and workplace services professionals. My name is Baachu, and I'll be sitting down with our facilities and workplace leaders to share their stories, discuss their career, and learn how to make an impact in the FM industry. Today's guest is Dr. Craig Knight. Craig, as we call him, is founder and director of Identity Realization Limited, IDR, a commercial organization based in Scotland with strong connections to blue chip industry. Dr. Knight retains research links with global universities, working with various organizations. This combination of commercial focus and scientific application has seen Craig help realize increase in well-being of up to 40% productivity and up to 32% and effective intelligence of up to 19%. Craig has been at the forefront of research projects. His commercial post-doctoral research points to what people need to thrive when working from home and in the third space, as well as what the new post-pandemic workplace must provide. Craig applies evidence-based science to improve leadership, employee retention, and the impact of design and management. Craig is chartered registered people, a doctor of psychologist, who has operated at director and managing director levels across business leadership, design, and consultancy sectors since the turn of the millennium. Published peer-reviewed studies by Craig and colleagues consistently show the most important factors in a successful working environment, which are a willingness by leaders to fully engage with employee input into business processes, the development of open decision-making, and developing trust. Building this new dialogue between psychology, leadership, and staff has been at the heart of television documentaries, academic discussion, and commercial debate. IDR directly challenges existing relationships and management practices. The effects are rapid, positive, dramatic, and long-lasting. That's brilliant. Thank you, Craig, for joining Baachu Talk FM podcast.
It's a pleasure. That's the most comprehensive introduction I've ever come across, Pascal. Thank you.
No, it's brilliant. It's your career, it's your story, Craig. So let's start from the beginning. Where were you born, and let's talk about your early life in schools and education.
Well, I mean, psychology came relatively late. I did a number of jobs. I was in sales for a long time, and I got into office design. And I was with a client one day, and I asked them how they decided who sat where in an office. And they pointed to a ceiling a little bit like yours, one in your office there. And they said, well, we count the number of ceiling tiles and divide by the number of people in the room and give them that number of ceiling tiles of space each. There might be a better way of doing it than that, I thought. And that just kicked me off to look at how people sit, react in space, and then from there, how leadership affects them and how management affects them. So workplace became more and more a thing in my life.
Got it. But before you became workplace, before you were into sales, let's talk about your early life. Where were you born?
I was born in the English Midlands. My hometown was a place called Leicester, which you may or may not have heard of. And my father took great pleasure in infecting me with the sporting fortunes of Leicester, be that the football team, the cricket team, or the rugby team.
Yes.
So that was all pretty rubbish until 7 years ago, when things were fantastic and we won the Premiership. And that was one of the best days of my life. That was just absolutely marvellous. And from there, we moved north and just outside Manchester. And then I had secondary school across in Bradford in West Yorkshire.
And from then on, what was your early graduation? Did you specialize around?
Yeah, I went to Cardiff first of all. And from Cardiff, I came back home and I took a job with the Yorkshire Post newspapers. And that was lovely. I enjoyed that. That was a really good job, especially being there during the miners' strike, which is what was utterly fascinating. Hideous time for the people concerned, but a fascinating place of how a government can traduce a whole level of society in one season. It's just incredible. And I stayed there for a while, and then I moved into the lands of IT, telephone systems, and that kind of stuff. And I was there for quite a long time. And after that, I just fancied a change. And after all the IT stuff, I got into offices. There was this company that impressed me quite a lot, a company called Claremont in the northwest of England. And I moved across there with a splendid guy called Mike McEwen. And Mike and I were sitting in the boardroom one day, and Steve Chamberlain, who owned the company at the time, said, "Gentlemen," he said, "I would like you to tell me what's wrong with my business." Which is a brilliant question to ask two guys who had just come in from the outside to look at what the business was about. And that, again, started you looking at what makes a business tick. And also, as it was a workplace business, what makes workplaces tick? How do people sell into workplaces? What do they do? How do they design to those workplaces? And crucially, and most importantly, what are the effects of those workplaces when they're designed, installed, and managed? What goes on there? And that, as I say, was a catalyst to everything else. I then did an Open University degree in psychology. I did a master's at Hull, a PhD at Exeter, got myself chartered and registered, and here we are today.
Wow. That's amazing. I think at least a few decades of your career, you just put it in a few lines there. Thank you, Craig. So what does workplace psychologists do?
Well, that's a really interesting question to start with, because the whole point of workplace psychology is it's an unprotected title. So when anybody comes across a workplace psychologist, the first thing they should do is ask, are they really a psychologist? And ask to check. Because if you, in the UK at least, if you want, anybody can come as a psychologist, anybody, for example, comes as a therapist. So be very careful if somebody says they're a workplace psychologist and check that they are. Say their qualifications. But to answer the question directly, what I do as a workplace psychologist is anything to do with people at work. And that, for example, could be handling issues of stress, it could be handling issues of recruitment, it could be handling issues of conflict, anything. But I've chosen to specialize, in my case, in the effects of design, leadership, and management on the people in the workplace. Because somebody was very keen once to know how much their input in terms of design was worth. You know, if somebody sells you £1,000 of design, how much money is that worth to the business? And they don't know, because there are things like seasons and holidays and staff changes and all these things. So we started to try to find out, and we found out. And that then got us to look at things like the cost of management and the different styles of leadership and how those affect people at work and what the costs are, both in terms of psychology. So the psychological costs of all benefits, of course, the psychological costs of what people do to you, and the physical, the commercial costs of following certain courses of action, be they good or bad.
Wow. So you already shared why you were interested in workplace psychology, and what inspired you to pursue this career. Any particular incident was the trigger point for you to know, what, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career or rest of my life?
Well, I mentioned the one about the ceiling tiles, encountering the ceiling tiles.
Yes.
And the second one was a beer. And I was just having a beer with a friend of mine. I said, it was really interesting why people do this. Why would people just divide up space? And why is it, I was saying at the other end, that some people think they're entitled to whacking great offices when they're never there, and they cram other people into little bits of space? What's going on? And a friend of mine just looked at her, she said, that sounds like psychology to me. Have you ever thought about that? And that was the catalyst, really, that pushed me forward. And that day, I wrote off to the Open University and asked to enroll in their courses. And wow. If anyone thinks about doing an Open University degree, do it. It's one of the best things you could ever do. It's a brilliant thing, an OU degree.
Yes, Open University is amazing. So
it is.
Like the beer incident that you mentioned, what do you think are some of the most common psychological challenges that employees do knowingly, unknowingly, or they face in the workplace?
Well, I think it depends which level of the scale we're talking about. I think the hardest thing and the most overlooked thing are the people at the bottom of the hierarchy.
Yes.
If you look, for example, at the design literature or the management literature, it always concentrates on what a chap called Peter Drucker called the knowledge workers. Those are the people with skill, with education, with high prospects. And it ignores what another guy called Paul Morrell called the over-managed, over-monitored majority. You know, the people that, for example, just rock up, sit in a call center all day and go home. Because what happens an awful lot of times, and you know, part-time jobs, this kind of stuff, is those people are overlooked in terms of sexy design and sexy management. And they are the ones that are treated too often like units of production. You know, they're put into corners, they don't have a desk to call their own, don't have a space to call their own, they can't necessarily personalize a space that they have. And those conditions are hellish. If you're sitting in a space where all you have is a blank desk and a screen, and you're monitored all the time, and people tell you what to do, and you have almost no rights at all in that space, that is a dreadful space. And really, we still have a situation where millions and millions of people in the workplace face that kind of stuff. And that's not just an office, of course. If you look at delivery drivers, the way the delivery drivers are monitored these days is appalling. They have these delivery windows that have to throw and make. They're monitored if they don't do it. They have to take photographs every stop they do. They're in huge trouble if they don't. They have no freedom to sort of save up a shift, try to do work so they can get home a bit earlier. So they don't do anything like that. And life for people like that, from a psychological perspective, can be sheer hell.
I think that delivery point, which you mentioned recently, just a couple of weeks ago, you are right. I think I won't name the delivery. I think he was mentioning in that whole building, he has 20 deliveries and he has nearly like 10 to 12 minutes to deliver all those things, you know, so, and he didn't even have time to go for toilet or, you know, have a tea or anything. It's always, it's fascinating. I think work, but it is not just fixed one.
People like posties, for example, they have the same kind of thing. If they're going to hit their target when they go on a postal delivery, they almost have to jog around and hope that nobody wants to talk to them very much. So it doesn't do anything for the quality of the job. We all want to enjoy our work, and it's a huge part of our life, which is why we do what we do. And sometimes organizations block people's enjoyment. They'll think about the sexy workers and the sexy design for the people at the top, and they'll forget all about the people at the bottom.
Positively, Craig, have you seen any success stories of companies taking this time, either it's blue-collar workers, knowledge workers, white-collar senior management, anything, have significantly improved their work environment through their psychology? Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, you know, not all companies are bad by any means. And well, let's take the example of design, shall we? Because design can have a phenomenal effect. So when a company thinks about the design it's going to do, when it goes out of its way to enrich space, it does make a significant difference, right? Because human beings are like any other beast. We don't like being in stark, minimalist spaces. If you take a gorilla, for example, and you put that gorilla in a lean enclosure in the zoo where it's got nothing to do except sit and look at the bars all day, it's a really unhappy beast. We're just the same. If you put us in a stark minimalist space, we're really unhappy too. And animals in those situations, they develop stereotypes, stress, they get angst, they get anger, they get all kinds of things, impotence, die early, everything you want. So when you therefore as an office perspective take that space and enrich it, and you take the trouble to put in really good designs, you put lots of plants, some pictures on the walls of interesting walkways, that kind of stuff, it can make a phenomenal difference. It can increase well-being by up to 30-odd%. It'll increase productivity by about 15%. It'll increase engagement by about 40%. All the variables really matter to business to shoot up. So good design really is a valuable thing to have.
And is there any companies that has done that positively?
Loads. But again, most of the companies that talk about it are the ones at the top of the tree. So, for example, if you just look at, let's say, some of Google's offices or Microsoft's offices or Facebook's offices, there are some really, really wacky designs there. One of the most famous things you may have heard of is if you want to go to the canteen in Google in Zurich, you have your lunch in a ski gondola, which is really good fun. Right? You get other places, you go to Red Bull in London, and that's quite nice. If you want to go down from one floor to another, you can take the stairs, or you can take a carbon fiber slide and slide down that way. Or lots of companies do different things like that, which can add to the workplace considerably and make life a lot more fun. WeWork, for example, when they sell a place, they make sure there's a beer pump. So if people want to have a beer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they can have one. And it's a case of treating people a little bit like grown-ups, which is quite nice. But I'm going to contradict myself deliberately now. What also is important is you don't want to treat them like kids. Too many companies do that. And to go back to that Red Bull example of the slide, you know, that's all fine, nipping down a slide, but you wouldn't want to go down in a skirt, for example, would you? It's not necessarily that considerate a thing when you think about it. So it's a case of input into the design that's even more important. Good design has an effect. Giving people input into that design has an even bigger effect, an amplified effect. So when companies do that, when they think about the space they're providing for their people, that's one thing. And then, of course, management and leadership have quantum effects of their own.
Got it. Brilliant. I think you already shared what contributes a positive work culture, also how organizations can implement them. Any one thing, you know, do this and don't do this part of this, Craig?
Yes. I mean, we can end the interview on this particular section if you want. What makes a really good job is a combination of three things. Right? You give people autonomy, the right to make their own decisions. You give them resources, stuff to do the job with. And that's not just physical things, that's things like time, access to the right people, quite as much as it's things like software and chairs. And you give them the time to do it. So autonomy, give them the trust to do it. So you trust people, then be honest. Give them the autonomy to get on with it, give them the resources to do the job, and trust them to get on with that, A, R, and T, and you have a good job. That's the definition of a good job.
Nice. Okay. So when it comes to about psychological safety or emotional intelligence, how do you think that plays with workplace and also because we all know how important it is to well-being and productivity of employees, but does people also look into, because you already talked about safety a little bit.
Yes.
How does the concept of EI and psychological safety play a role in this overall?
Well, that's a very intelligent question. Emotional safety is psychological safety thing, but if you think about safety as part of something, and we look at an overall concept called psychological wellness, and that's how at home, psychological ambience, how comfortable people feel in their workspace, because feeling safe is a part of that. So it's how at home you feel in your workplace. That's a crucial variable that influences almost everything else. If you feel at home, comfortable, safe in your space, then you can really get on and do the job. But that is, as you will appreciate, not something you can do like that. You can't just go in and say, I'm going to feel comfortable today. It's the action of that autonomy, resource, and trust, those three things we spoke about, that act directly on how well you feel. If you have those things, you feel well, you feel safe, you feel good, because you can monitor your own workspace. So people that say, well, we're going to get somebody in to talk about wellness are wasting their time if the company's not doing a good job, because you can't just make people well by telling them to go and eat sweets and exercise. You can make people psychologically well by giving them those three things that we've just spoken about. And emotional intelligence is another woolly thing, right? Emotional intelligence these days comes from a book written by Daniel Goleman, which is very wafty. Emotional intelligence itself is a brilliant concept. It was developed mainly by two people called Salovey and Meyer back in the early 1990s, and that is superb. And people should go back to that and look at it and understand what it is, because having emotional intelligence is an incredibly valuable thing. And again, just to pull full circle, if a management team, if an organization has emotional intelligence, it will give people autonomy, resource, and trust. So it all comes back to that. Rather than saying we're going to have stress management classes, we're going to look people and we're going to take people for walks around the countryside. That will make no difference if people don't have those three things.
That's a brilliant point. You also alluded to the mental health and stress. This month is Stress Awareness Month, as you know,
Yes.
and you're going to find a lot of notes coming up with how we can do this, all these things.
Sure.
But realistically, practically, what are some of the strategies that managers and leaders can use to help employees manage stress and maintain mental health in workplace?
So you were talking about stress, and I was saying the best thing to do to handle stress in a job is to understand the job, right? rather than look at, say, sleep pattern, which might be the thing, but let's look at the job first. That's most likely to be the cause. So you'll go and evaluate the job itself. You will analyze it, and that's an important but boring job that can take a long time, a whole afternoon sometimes, but you do it. And you then get the elements of the job built up. If you then send out something like a survey, for example, around everybody, and you have a look at what's going on within those elements, you can see two things. You can see, one, levels of stress across the organization. And you can also then see levels of stress by department, and if people want to do it, and it's important that confidentiality is maintained, otherwise, if people want to do it, down to an individual level as well. So that gives you a beautiful three-dimensional view of stress in your organization. And then if you do that, and everything seems okay in terms of the job stress, then you can look at external factors like sleep and nutrition, all these other really important things. So first of all, make sure management's doing its job right. That's the most likely cause of stress. If that's happening and you're still getting stress, then look at the job itself. And if it's still not, then it's going to be an external factor the other way, and you look at things like sleep patterns, family stress, and work-life balance, all these kind of things.
Nice, thanks, Craig. So again, with more people working from remotely or in hybrid work environment, these principles still apply to them as well? Or
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I looked at people who did a longitudinal bit of research right through the pandemic, people working from home. And working from home is a different workplace, but it's still as open to things like stress as anything else. And there's a very interesting pattern to echo what we were talking about earlier. As stress, for example, at the start of the pandemic when people were working from home was pretty much the same for everybody. But by the end of the pandemic, management was having a great time, and the people at the bottom of the food pile generally weren't, which is another really, really interesting finding. So, yeah.
And also part of when we say employees as a whole, they are actually different, they are unique. So what role does diversity, inclusion, justice, equity play in creating a psychologically healthy workplace?
It's crucial. We're a diverse world. The workplace should reflect the world around us, and that's in every sense. Okay, it's very easy, relatively easy, it should be easy, to reflect the world around you in terms of colour and gender and age, because you can see those. So you can look at an organisation and say, does it roughly reflect what's going on in society? But we need to also consider things like neurodiversity. I was at a conference last week, and I was talking to this absolutely brilliant woman who had ADHD. And she struggled to find a job because nobody could place her. Now, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. All of us do. And if you can highlight the strengths of somebody who's really bright and neurodiverse and put them in a job that works for them, just as you do for everybody else, then you get a fantastic workforce. And then you get a workforce that's open to all. Regardless of age, regardless of color, regardless of diversity, everybody can do something to benefit the workplace. And it's not a nice thing to do. It's not a woke thing to do. It's a thing to do for the health of the business. You will have a more profitable business as a result of doing it.
But like your boss asked you early on, what's wrong? Why does people don't do these things, Craig?
Well, two reasons. And the one that covers both, I suppose, is it's easy. Business is full of hubris. There's a lovely guy called James Handy, who is a brilliant economic guru, sort of an Anglo-Irishman who's based at LSE. And he said that business is full of really intelligent people doing remarkably stupid things. So people do practice that they've been there for a long time and then ignore stuff. And then it's easy. If you put adverts, for example, in the Daily Telegraph in the UK, which lots of ads do, or the Sunday Times, they tend to be read by middle-aged white people. So even if you're an equal opportunity employer, you get a raft of responses from middle-aged white people. So you need to think about where you recruit, how you advertise what's going on, how you get stuff back. And don't put it in the Voice, because that's not the thing to do. If you want Afro-Caribbean people, find what they read. Don't just assume something. Go and look at what the Asian community wants. Because the Asian community, if you look at, for example, IQ scores, tend to score higher than any other part of society. So let's get these people all involved and all in a mix together and find out how it works. And it's not hard. It's just logic.
It's budget time, as you rightly said, and also, they just, end of the day, do you find this diversity, inclusion, mental health, well-being, stress, and all those things, companies use it as a fad and talk about it, but then end of the day, they continue to do the same thing? Because recently, there's so many stuff that happens in social media, you just tend to question, hey, I know this business really well. They don't follow anything that they say out loud. So why is it also, is it becoming like this general look at me and then, just go and do it? Is also psychology, do you think the psychology of workplace and also leaders and also companies have changed now? They want to just pretend or show that they are doing it rather than actually doing it. Are you finding it as well?
There's a trend all over the place, right? So it's particularly prevalent on social media, or let's call it emotional exhibitionism.
Yes.
Everybody needs to have some kind of issue, and everyone has to have it solved, and everybody needs to go out and talk about it. And companies are just the same. Yes. So companies say we're stressed, we have mental health issues, all this kind of stuff, we've got people melding. No, they don't. What they want is to put a big tick in the box. So that's what I'm talking about earlier on. People want to get in, they'll get in people and they'll say, I'm a stress specialist. We're going to get our people talking about stress. We're going to get our people talking about their mental health. We're going to get our people talking about something really valuable, which is nutrition, for example. But what they don't want to do is, as we said before, attack the main problem, which is management. Management causes almost all of the issues in organizations. 70% of people leave their jobs because of issues with management. That's an awful lot of people. Not to advance their career, not for more money, to get away from some kind of issue with management. So a very good question for all organizations to ask is, what is the point of management in this company? And they answered that, and they answer it well, and they'll get a whole lot of problems sorted. And that will automatically solve problems down the far end. So rather than do the emotional exhibition, we're going to get people in to look after our mental health. No, they're not. What they're going to do is get people in to put a sticking plaster on an issue that they've caused, sort the front end out. Then, if you still get issues at the far end, attack it there. Because things like stress, are what we call a dependent variable. They depend on what else happens. You can't just go into work and say, I'm not going to feel stressed today. Something's causing that stress, find out what it is.
That's a very, very important point. Thank you for sharing that. The rise of AI, which has been the talk for the past 2-3 months, especially after ChatGPT, OpenAI, etc., and automation. Have you seen any early studies about the impact of AI, positive, negative, on the psychological well-being or of employees and also people and workplaces?
The quick answer to that is nothing of that I trust necessarily, but there's some fantastic hypothesizing going on at the moment, because AI we can all look at doomsday scenarios and say, well, what's it's going to do us all out of a job. But we should also recognize it's got some fantastic possibilities as well. If you use something like what's it called, ChatGPT, I think it is, it can develop just some wonderful things like quotations, for example. And you might say, well, that's unfair using it, but if everybody's doing it, the quality of information that would be put forward can be improved by masses. Because what AI is going to be really good at is doing the stuff well that we find really boring. The mundane kind of responses that people just sort of tick through boxes can suddenly be done well. It can also perk up people's lives at the bottom end, because all these boring jobs that we're talking about can be handled by AI, which means that the people that do those jobs at the moment, there's the issue of threat, we'll come back to that, but all those people, those jobs at the moment, can then do the elements of those jobs they want to do, that they do enjoy, that can be done better. Right? Because if you're a human being, you have the ability to intuit, you have the ability to understand, you have the ability to get inside other people's heads, which AI at the moment doesn't have. If you look, for example, you met Nick Cave, the musician you've probably heard of. Nick Cave was presented with some stuff that AI had done in his style. And I recommend people look at it online. It's just brilliantly dismissive. And Simon Armitage, the poet laureate, was also confronted with some poetry that AI had written. And he looks at it, well, it rhymes, right? Because it will do basic stuff, but it won't do the high level things. And it gives us as humans the chance to do something to achieve what Csikszentmihalyi, get it there in the end, called a sense of flow. That is, achieve what we can do best, because other stuff underneath is being done for us. So AI has some fabulous potential like that, as well as all the doomsday stuff that people talk about, of course.
Yes.
We need to consider.
I think, as you rightly said, I'm a firm believer of exactly this same principle that you put forward to say, you know what, we are doing all this repeatable, mundane, boring stuff. Now you have an AI friend who can sit and do that work for you, that allows you to be more creative, strategic, and do the things, or get the time that you want to do stuff that you always want to do. That's nice. So when we talk about, again, employees, we talked about diversity around the different people, but also there could be psychological differences of people working in a corporate environment or enterprise than for a small business startup environment. How do you think the psychology affects? Some people prefer to work in startup for 1 to 10, 20 max people. Others tend to go for mid-cap small companies like 20 to 100-ish, and others tend to say an enterprise. Do you find people consciously choose to work around, or they just, or based on the opportunity growth, they just move along? Was there any psychology, workplace psychology or employee related analysis in there?
Again, you hit on something quite interesting there. What I do in my job is look at issues in the workplace. And smaller companies tend to have fewer of those issues. They still have them. Every company has its own issues. But when, let's say we start a company between us, we will decide what time we want to come into work, what kind of car we want to drive, what furniture we'd like, where we'd like to sit. And that tends to be true up to about a level of 20, roughly speaking, about 20 people. When you get to sort of 20, 21 people plus, suddenly one person needs to know better than everybody else. And they say, we're going to have this furniture, we're going to have this design, we're going to come in at this time, you're going to come in at this time, Bhaskar, I'm going to come in at this time, and let these people down the road, they can do this shift. And as soon as somebody starts to know better than everybody else, then the psychological issues tend to really kick off. So there is that size. And then the way the organization runs in terms of its structure, its hierarchy, how open it is, has different effects as well.
That's so true. And we also have generational differences. People call Gen Z, baby boomers, Gen X, etc. And there is also some psychological issues that happen with generational things. What did you find so far? And also, how can companies work along with different generations?
Okay. First of all, to answer the last point first, how do you cope with different generations? How do you cope with different people? Ask what people need, get them to do the job. Now, as far as generational differences are concerned, that's annoying. We are people. We are generally the same. So people will talk, when I saw the other day, for example, they're talking about different issues of stress in the workplace. And the figure was not, this is, forgive me, this is not bang on, but it's an accurate representation. It said that 73% of people are stressed at work. 83% of Gen Z are stressed at work. What's going on with Gen Z? That's entirely the wrong question. What we should be looking at is 73% of people are stressed at work, and there are variations around that figure. Because the difference between 73 and 83 is 10, but 73% of us are stressed at work, and that fits in very much with the 70% management figure I gave you before. We are, as people, pretty much the same with differences. We react pretty much the same with differences. So what we do is we make a workspace that works for everybody, and we let people have input into that workspace and how they want to work that accounts for those differences, and that's it. Me as an old bloke and an old chap, and there's somebody, it's a woman who's just starting after a university career, comes in at 21. We have pretty similar reactions to that space. I mentioned the need, for example, for enrichment in the space. We both have that. What we do have differently is we might say, well, actually, I quite like roses in space, or I'd like this plant. And she went, I prefer cacti. So she went, that's the difference. But the difference is relatively small compared to the similarities between us. And that's the same right across the piece. It's not difficult to get a workspace right. You do the basics that appeal to everybody, and you then allow people to modify the space, to modify their work plans to suit themselves. If you've got kids, you will want different work plans to if you haven't. It's not rocket science, is it?
Totally. I think that's a very, very important point, Craig. Find the commonality or the similarities rather than to find differences. You're right, time and time again, or becoming a very, very standard practice now to just go deeper and deeper into segmenting people, segmenting stuff, and getting deeper into why people are unique. But it's also important to balance the commonality as well. That's a point. You also mentioned about communications, what simply ask, but what role in general communications play in creating a psychologically healthy workplace, and why do organizations don't get it wrong or don't get it right?
I refer you back to Charles Handley above and clever people doing stupid things. People tend to, a quick example, we are following work plans, think of agile working, flexible work plans, hot desking, all this kind of stuff is at least 100 years old. Agile working was first developed by Josiah Wedgwood back in the 1760s, right? So we just keep on repeating the same mistakes year after year after year. That's one reason. But all people need to do is give people input into the space, right? And give people input into the management that they have. And let them decide, really.
That's a good point. Thank you, Craig. So from your experience of working with organizations at all levels, what do you think are the common reasons or excuses that management or organization give for not investing in workplace psychology initiatives?
Whether people exist in workplace psychology or not, it is up to them. What people need to do is invest in the people that work for them. That's the really key thing. And you need to invest in people as sentient, difficult, perspicacious but capricious animals, if you will, because they will act differently at different times to exactly the same response. So when you set up a space, you need to make it flexible enough to handle people's psychologies, because we're all different. So to put people in the straitjacket of the same space, expecting the same behavior patterns and expecting the same rules to be followed, isn't going to happen. The psychology of the workplace is about the psychology of the people in it, because people are what make a space. They're what make an organization. So allow for them to express their psychologies, and you will have a good place to work, because you're going back to those things of autonomy, resource, and trusting. You're allowing people to do that. That is what the psychology of the workspace is about. It is not about management showing off. It is not about making grand statements. It is not about emotional exhibitionism. It's about getting the space right for the people that work there and managing them in the way that works for the people, not for the management team.
Well said. Thank you. So, you already talked about some of the creative out-of-box ways that Google or Red Bull or others have done to create an organization, like implement workplaces. Is there any other examples or any other out-of-box creative workplace environments that you have seen?
A good one that I really quite like. I'll even mention the company name because I was so impressed with them. I don't really mention company names, but there's a company called Ambius, and Ambius had an office in Paris, and they were getting very involved. They helped them. Without Ambius, I didn't know PhD that I did. They were fantastic support. Getting very involved in the research that was going on that we were doing in Exeter at the time. And they wanted to make their office in Paris as flexible and right for the people that were there as they could, but they had no budget at all. So what they said to the people in Paris, well, just make yourselves at home, do what you want in the space. And so the people in Paris did exactly that, and they developed their own space. And so you went in, and for example, what happened when you went up the stairs is people had drawn portraits of each other. So you draw a picture of me, I'll draw one of you, or somebody else, whatever. And those pictures, some of which are utterly bloody awful but really funny, were in frames as you went up the wall. You had to try and guess who they were. You went into the reception desk and you would see different strands of. I remember there was some team and they were very into Africa. So they had camouflage nets all over the place. They had sort of palm trees going up. Somebody else wants the Moulin Rouge, and it was pink, and they had feathers going around the place. They had a meeting room that looked like the moon. They'd done it so they had a star net at the back with little lights on. They had cream-coloured bean bags like moon rocks and a low black table. And the whole place looked utterly fantastic, completely different. They designed it themselves, so they loved it. So they bought into all the inherent flaws in that space because they'd done it. I think one of the happiest working environments you could go to. And the cost of it to the company was, I won't say it was nothing, because I'm sure they provided something, but almost nothing, because people brought in all the kit themselves. And it was one of the healthiest workplaces you could wish to see. It was brilliant.
You already mentioned, that's amazing how you could, rather than you decide, you ask. If you give the people the empowerment, they do it. So what are some of the most surprising and unexpected benefits that employees can get when we genuinely invest on this well-being place?
Okay. All right. I've been a bit harsh on management so far because of what goes on, how things don't work. If management do it right, if they get it right, if they manage properly, if the leaders understand what leadership is, if people understand what culture is that most companies don't, if they get all of these things right, then the benefits at the far end are not just more money. They're not just higher, they're key, crucial organization for everything like well-being and psychology and stress and engagement and citizenship behavior and all of these things, overall happiness will all go up. But it makes everybody's job easier. Right? So management will have a far easier life because people are happier. Relationships across the organization will be better. There's a thing called congruent identity, and a healthy organization has congruent identity. Now, what that means is that you and I are a team. So as a team, teams tend to identify quite well with each other, marketing, sales, accounts, whatever it happens to be. Just as unions, for example, tend to identify quite closely together. And similar teams are management. So these teams are identified together quite closely, but they can have very disparate identity because there's us and them. We are our team, we hate that team over there. But when you have an organization which is being managed, led properly, what you have is congruent identity. People identify both with themselves and with other people, and crucially with the organization. When you get this thing where everybody goes in the same direction, you have a hell of an organization. You have that much overused word, synchronicity, in its defined sense of the word, by getting congruent identity. And life is easier and pleasanter, and you don't need to work as hard or as long to achieve it.
That's very important, Craig. But in the world where people think about, okay, I'm investing on workplace, there should be a return of investment on this, people tend to fear there might not be immediate or tangible initiatives. What advice would you give it to these management, these leaders who are hesitant to invest, and also who have invested thinking, I'm not really getting anything out of it? What's happening there?
So again, that's a nice question. Let me try and unpick it. I'm going to go back to something Mr. touched on earlier, which is the value of doing something. Okay, there was a chap called Graham Horn, actually a lovely bloke, and he wanted to know the value of putting his furniture and design in and how much money it brought back, because he couldn't tell because of all the factors we spoke about before. And that brings us to the issue of measuring productivity, which people cannot do. People cannot measure productivity. And I'll give you a quick example. The commonest way that people think we are more productive or less productive is they send out questionnaires to people. And they'll say, working from home, working from the office, where are you most productive? People are absolutely bloody clueless of how productive they are, because it's an objective measure. If you were to run a marathon, and at the end of the race, I said, well, Bhaskar, what was your time in that marathon? But there's no stopwatch involved. Yes, that's really good. So you world record, Bhaskar, awfully good, very well done. If you could just give me a time that you thought. When you measure a car's speed from 0 to 60 or its miles per gallon, you can't do it without an objective. You can't just say, well, how fast do you think you were going or what mileage do you think you got? You've got to get those accurate figures measured objectively. And productivity It's just the same. You cannot measure it by questionnaire. You have to measure it objectively. And people don't know how to do that. So a quick example, we was talking about call centers before. Now they're measured in the nth degree of their life. A lot of the time, productivity is measured in a call center by how quickly you answer a phone call, how quickly you handle the phone call, and how fast you do the admin associated with that phone call. So more phone calls, you're more productive. So the most productive call, and as you pick up the phone straight away, tell the person to get lost, put the phone down, and there's no admin associated with it. Those and those thousands of phone calls in the course of a day. So is that productive? No, it's not. So the first thing you need to do is measure productivity, which we actually know how to do, thank God, but nobody else seems to. So because companies can't measure productivity, they measure cost cutting instead. So things, for example, like Lean and Six Sigma concentrate on waste and error reduction, both of which are complete anathema. Because first of all, if you're cutting waste, whose waste? If you believe in this lean, clean space, your waste is my important photograph from my family, or my souvenir from Spain, or that plant that I like. That goes away. That has huge psychological ramifications that affect productivity, but they're not measuring that. If you're talking about reducing error, well, if you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. That's another stupid thing. So again, Lean and Six Sigma, these bastions of management that are the most popular method of management across the world, don't not work. They're toxic. When you're doing all that and you're looking at productivity and measurement, then what's going on? So what management needs to do is stop doing this stupid stuff and instead focus on doing things right. Because we can teach people to measure productivity. We can teach people how to get the right things done at the front end. When we do it, we get all of these good benefits that we spoke about before in terms of well-being and performance and low stress and everything else. And it just needs sense and intelligence. And there you go, it's done. I'm sorry, it's a long answer. That answers your question.
No, I think that's brilliant. I mean, like, I think it's important. I mean, like, don't get, certain elements in life can't be measured. And here you're doing the right thing for employees. If they're happy, if they are at the right place, and if you are managed to retain the right sort of employees, and that converts itself into the bottom line. Again, it's a nice summary there, Craig. Craig, finally, just for fun, before we enter into personal or rapid random fire questions, if you could create an ideal, psychological, healthy workplace, what would be some of the most distinctive and unusual features?
It's not difficult, really. The best workplace are ones that people build themselves. So you let people build it themselves, but what you do is you let people develop that space by themselves as teams. So rather than you and I saying, I want this and I want that, which is a recipe for chaos, what we do is we build that space together. And we also factor in expertise, say like management, for example, that we control. So instead of management saying, we're going to do this, what management is about facilitating what goes on. So we explain to management how they need to facilitate us to do our job. Because management is not about ordering. That's not what management is, but every company seems to think it is. Management is about facilitating what people need to do their job. So we bring management in, but instead of them telling us, we tell them what we need. The space is developed, and management is developed in the way that we want it to. And I tell you, my friend, that gives you a wonderful space because you have in it what you want. You're managing the way you want.
Craig, when you're not working on workplaces, psychology, leadership, management, researching and other stuff, what activities or hobbies do you enjoy that help you?
Oh, far too many. I don't mind. I like the sport, you've probably gathered. I like any kind of sport. I'm a sucker for that. I love my politics. Again, I just like, not from a particular political perspective, just into politics and how it matters, because politics, the large P or a small one, affects all of us. That's important. I am a complete greedy pig, so I like food and I like drink and all that kind of thing. That's always good. And I love what I do. So I'm always interested to find out what's going on in the world of psychology, what's going on in design, management, leadership stuff. how people affect culture, for example. We haven't spoken about culture, and culture is one of the most misunderstood things in business. So I like to see how people are approaching that. And other stuff, I do a bit of Amdram in my time as well. I'm involved in a play that's coming up in a few weeks. And lots of different bits, really, but I don't like being idle. I like doing stuff.
That's nice. Thank you for sharing, Dr. So next round we are going to get into rapid random fire. There's no right or wrong answer. Whatever comes in your mind is.
Okay. What's this? A random association?
Yes, random associations. That's it. So let's just go. If you could invite any 3 famous people, living or deceased, to a dinner, who would you invite to and why?
Got to dinner?
Okay.
Well, I've always been fascinated by Satan. I think he's a fascinating bloke, so I'd invite him for a start. And similarly, my favourite deity, although I'm not the world's greatest believer, would be Jesus Christ. I think he was. I was going to have a beer with any deity. It'd be Jesus. He's wonderful. But I'd have those 2, and then who else? Who else would I like to invite? I think I'd like to invite somebody who's really going to stir it up. Let me think of Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King was the first woman who got me switched onto feminism. She did it with humour, wit, and immense drive. So I'd invite her or Germaine Greer, one of those 2. They're both just great stirrers, and they make people think. So give me 4. 2 of each, then we get a party. Satan, Jesus, Billie Jean King, Germaine Greer. Of those 4.
Oh, that's brilliant. And as someone who has studied the impact of office spaces and workplace for a long time, do you have a favorite fictional workplace from a book or a movie or a TV show that says, I found that particularly fascinating? Anything?
What a brilliant question. Do you know what? I've never actually thought of that, about a fictional workplace. Starship Enterprise's bridge. That's always been interesting. I don't know if you go back to, if you haven't seen the original Star Trek with James T. Kirk and Spock and all the rest of it. Some wooden top acting, but some wonderful sort of bobbly shutters and doors. How they reacted in those different spaces. So they all did different things in those spaces, and they went from being interacting characters to suddenly being insular characters. So if Ahura, for example, is talking, she's having a chat with James T. Then she got to do something on the switchboard. She goes back and she'll concentrate on making sure the comms are all right. Spock is the same kind of thing. So yes, the interaction of the Starship Enterprise would be interesting, and how you could improve it, because you could. It's far from a perfect workspace.
That's a good one. So if you could ask for any superpower, what would it be and how would you use it?
Bloody hell. Superpower. I would like the superpower to be able to make people a bit more considerate. Because we're a fairly insane, I probably sound hideously worthy, but if you could suddenly do that, and you could make these very intelligent people doing stupid things suddenly realize that that's a stupid thing, because I'm not really thinking about other people outside my own circle. That would just be fantastic. So the ability to make me and everybody else a little bit more considerate, that would be my superpower.
That's beautiful. So, you have enough hobbies, you have enough research work, and about office environments. What is your go-to comfort food or activity that brings you joy? The one thing.
Well, you know what? There's a program on the radio called Just One Thing, which is about the one food that you would eat. And the one thing that if you had one, mine's really boring, beans on toast. So I'd have beans on toast, and I'd have some sport. That would be important, and a good book. Give me those 3 things. How's that? That answer your question? I've got something to eat, something to watch, and something to read. I'll be happy.
That's good. Again, I was about to ask you if you are stranded in a deserted island, what would you take with you? I think you kind of answered it. But
it's like desert island discs, Bhaskar. What the one thing I'd take with me? I'd take a radio. I'd take a radio. There's so much good stuff on the radio. I'd have that. Assuming that I've got an unlimited selection, I can get Radio 4 and anything else that I want. Radio 5 when there's sports on, and Radio 6 music now and again. I'd have a radio.
That's amazing. I think when kids, because having a father of 2 kids who are digitally connected with, you imagine everything. But watch. Radio is such a, breath of fresh air to listen to.
I spoke about plays. We have a play on the radio. The scenery is always better. Doesn't matter what you do.
Yes, that's totally. So what's your favorite destination that you always dreamt of visiting, or you have already visited, and why does it appeal to you?
I'll tell you where I haven't gone and I want to go to. I want to go to India. I've never been to India. I've had lots and lots of Indian friends. I want to go to India. I want to take a train journey. And I'd also quite like to take a motorbike. They still build, I understand, Enfield motorbikes in India. And they can relay them across the country. And the idea of doing that before I get too decrepit would just be wonderful. The culture of the place just appeals to me hugely. Everything from the food to the majesty of the Raj, to the scenery, the whole thing in India. I'd love to go. Never been.
Yes, I totally. Again, there are touristy part of India where people tend to go and put a tick that I've been to India, and there are this trekking and this nature-driven environments, or where you could get in to get a good feel for India. Yeah, definitely visit there. Even I haven't. The trouble is, born in India, you travel outside of India more than what you travel inside.
Sure.
Yeah, but 100%.
I want to sneak into Kashmir when nobody's looking. I mean, that's people have told me that it's the most beautiful place in the world. I want to go.
Totally, 100%. So, if you're not in this sector, workplace psychology, what other profession would you have chosen?
I find as I get older and increasingly useless that everything my mother said was generally right. And when I was a kid, she said, and she was absolutely, you should go to sports journalism, Craig. You should do that. And yeah, I really probably should have done that. That would have been good. You know, I could see myself commentating on World Cup finals and putting microphones under people's noses and that kind of stuff. I'd have enjoyed that. So that. I like these superpowers. These are awesome, Bhaskar. Keep these going. You know?
Yes. So, what's your favorite movie show or something that you watch regularly?
Well, that I watch regularly. That's quite difficult. I mean, I like politics, and I watch a lot of political stuff, like the Question Times and so forth. But I also like movies and stuff. One thing I watch regularly that I wouldn't want to give up.
Yes.
Movies. I like it good. I mean, that's the one thing I would not like to give up. Movies. I like a good film. I saw the Banshees of Inisherin last weekend, which is dark and deeply peculiar and just awesome. just things like that. I would miss the hypnotizing effect of being sucked into a good film. It's something I think I'd miss massively.
That's amazing. And what's something that you have spent money on that you absolutely don't need to buy?
Everything. I'm a hideous impulse buyer. What I bought recently, I suppose, is the question. So, yes, a barometer. I bought a barometer I never use. I thought it's pretty, it's nice lying it on the wall. I don't use it. I walk past it, I don't like it anymore. So it'll be going fairly soon. That's the latest thing.
Do you remember the very first band that you ever saw live? Or who was it?
I do. Yes, I do. And I had quite a shock seeing my very first band live. It was the Tom Robinson Band. You may remember did a song called 2468 Motorway.
Yes.
And I would have been about 15, and I went with a friend of mine, and we went to see the Tom Robinson Band play. And Tom Robinson was very much, in that's in the 70s, was very much into gay rights and stuff, which has sort of passed me by. I just liked the song. And Tom Robinson, sort of halfway through this gig, says, right, he says, turn to the man on your right and give him a big kiss. And as a 15-year-old boy, I was really, really not expecting that. So that was the first band I saw, and it will stay in my mind forever.
Oh.
So thank you, Tom.
Yes, nice. So what's something that's weird that you have eaten so far, that you consider weird? It could be normal for others, but you consider, oh, that's so weird.
Well, the things I want to eat that are weird. It's another reason for going to India, because it's my favorite cuisine. What have I eaten what I consider weird? Broccoli and chocolate. That's what I had. That was weird, because somebody said it's a chemical combination that works really well. And somebody gives you broccoli with chocolate custard on the top, and you think, that's disgusting and horrible. And it's actually not bad. Whoever worked that out was right. Broccoli with sort of chocolate sauce strangely works. But yeah, that's the weirdest thing I've made.
Totally. So if you could choose to be a kitchen appliance, which kitchen appliance would you choose to be?
Are you taking the mick now, Pascal? Aren't you really? A spoon. It's a spoon because I like stirring things. That's what I'd like to be.
Oh, that's a very, very interesting one. So if you could, obviously you are in a coffee shop having a coffee, but if you could, if you're given a choice, you could never have a coffee again, or you could never have a dessert again, or which one would you choose?
I'd give it the sweets and keep the coffee. I mean, I've got one of my favourite things here. I've got to tip this. I've got an almond croissant there because I think they're really nice, but no. We keep the coffee and get rid of the sweets.
So last question, what was the last gift that you gave someone?
An Easter egg, that's easy. it's chocolate time, isn't it? So that would be an Easter egg.
So again, we touched a lot about your career, and here, is there something, one or two things that not many people know about you?
Really, I'm a pretty WYSIWYG open book, really. I don't think so. What don't people know about you? Yes, I lived in Australia for a bit, and there's one sports team that isn't tied to Leicester. I told my father infected me with Leicester before I left as an 8-year-old. The one team that I support that isn't anything to do with Leicester is the Queensland Rugby League team. So I was over there and got totally swept up in it. So I am an official maroon. As they call them over there, you're a maroon, mate. So yeah, the Paxton Hotel, Queensland Rugby team. I'm there with my pint of Castlemaine Forex, even though I hate the stuff. Yeah, there you go. I'm a closet Aussie rugby league fan.
That's amazing. So thank you for sharing, Craig. So now let's go back to the people in your life. Who are the people who have been the most influential in your life and career?
Bloody hell. Who would that be? 3 people. All right. 2 teachers. One was a woman called Alice Press, who was a primary school teacher when I was in Oldham. And she taught a lazy boy how to work at school. And everything Alice Press taught me got me through to my master's. And I did that, but purely listening to what I was taught at primary school. And then there's a guy called Alex Haslam, who was my PhD supervisor. Who is not only one of the nicest blokes you could wish to meet, he's one of the most capable. And he saw me through to a pretty decent PhD, which I would just not have got without him. And the third person is my mother, who, like I said at the start, in terms of sports journalism and stuff, turns out she gave some of the most fantastic advice I could ever wish to hear. So those 3.
That's beautiful. And you talked about some of the important people in your life, Craig. Again, if there is one piece of advice that you have got which you could pass on to the listeners, either that advice or something specific that you want to share, what would be that one piece of advice?
Enjoy what you do. If you don't enjoy what you do, find something that you do enjoy. That's the most important. You're a long time dead. So find something you enjoy doing and do that. And
what's the common myth about the workplace profession that you want to debunk?
There are so many myths about the workplace. Okay, I'm going to twist that if you don't mind, and forgive me. I'm going to answer the question indirectly. I want to say, the workplace, remember the word art. Okay, art, ART. It's not difficult. Autonomy, resource, trust. Or if you want, remember the word RAT, resource, autonomy, trust. Doesn't matter. Remember those. Give those. You've got a great workplace and a great job. That's what I'd like to do with the work. There's so many things that people do that they really shouldn't.
Yes, I think that's important, and that's a very powerful takeaway from this podcast as well. So as you come to the end of the podcast now, Craig, is there any part of your life or career, or is there anything else that you would like to share to the listeners before we close it?
I'm sure I bored everyone to tears, Pascal. No, I think I've done more than enough. I mean, the kitchen implement was the one that got me. Name what kind of kitchen implement you'd be. No. More than enough about my sad existence. No, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Craig. I mean, it's an absolute privilege and honor to have you with Baachu Talk FM. So please do continue to inspire us, continue to share your wisdom, and stay healthy, stay happy. And I'm so looking forward to catch up with you soon, face to face. To all our listeners, Thank you for tuning in. Please do visit www.baachurain.com/Baachu Talk FM podcast. To this specific episode link to everything that was mentioned in this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and share Baachu Talk FM podcast. We will see you at the next episode with another special guest. Until then, it's Baachu signing off.